Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. I'm Tanisha Sullivan, your host. Tonight, the cost of inheritance. Around the country and here in Massachusetts, Reparations has invited critical debate and discussion on the issue. The new documentary, The Cost of Inheritance, weaves together the complex and nuanced history of reparations in the United States, told through experts, community interests, and the descendants of both those enslaved and their enslavers. By presenting the personal stories in the film, viewers will see how descendants from both sides of the issue work together to seek reconciliation and repair around this incredibly complicated, divisive, and intimate subject. You can watch The Cost of Inheritance on World, GBH, and on YouTube. Joining me tonight to discuss the film, Yoruba Richen, an award-winning filmmaker and director of The Cost of Inheritance. Randy Quarterman is the fifth-generation descendant of Zeike Quarterman, who was enslaved by George Adam Keller and co-founder of the Reparations Project. Sarah Eisner is the descendant of George Adam Keller, Zeike Quarterman's enslaver, and the co-founder of the Reparations Project. And Chris Hastings, editor-in-chief and executive producer of World here at GBH. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
I am excited to have this conversation. The film is phenomenal, deeply moving, thoughtful, and certainly inspires the viewer to think about this issue in, I think, a different way. And so, Yoruba, can you just share with us a little bit about why it was important to tell this story?
Absolutely. When I got the opportunity to direct this film, and I knew it was a film about reparations, I was immediately excited and intrigued. And the initial thing that I thought about and that I had been thinking about is how far our discussions on reparations in this country and really around the world have come. I remember, growing up, in the 80s and 90s, it was a fringe issue. It was considered crazy talk to talk about reparations. And the fact that it has, in the last, number of years, it has penetrated the mainstream in terms of conversation, the political, politicians having to address it and having to, expound on their views around it. And, of course, the personal efforts that are happening all around the country. I mean, that was one of the most amazing parts of making this film, of learning about these efforts that are happening between descendants of enslaved and enslavers, between what's happening institutionally wise, reckoning with that legacy of slavery, and of course subsequently Jim Crow and segregation. So it was really the time to make this film.
Chris, can you share why this was an attractive project for you and your team at World?
Well, I think, first of all, because Yoruba was directing it, that's, first and foremost, and the team that was working with Yoruba. Darryl Fort Williams, who is a mentor of mine and executive producer in the film, they all came together with this film that I thought needed to have a larger audience. For us at World, we try to share content about and from the perspective of diversity. And this conversation of reparations, which, for some people it's a hard conversation, we pride ourselves on presenting work that brings some of these hard conversations to light. And we wanted to elevate these filmmakers with this story in our flagship series, America Frame. When you think about reparations, as Yoruba mentioned a bit ago, years ago it was thought of, we shouldn't talk about that. But here we are in 2024. We're about to start an election year. And it made sense to me and others that we should center this work, center this research, center the idea that, maybe we should talk about what does reparations look like. And the word reparations is a hard word for some. For me, I think of reparations as repair, right? And, you know, years of racism that exists here in the U.S., it's important to start thinking about the other side of that. What does it look like to get to the other side of racism and to start healing? And I think this film starts to sort of answer some of those questions of what it could look like. And so when it came to me, I was like, yeah, let's do it.
Wonderful.
And just to add, too, we're in a time period where there are literally efforts trying to ban this kind of history and understanding of our shared history in this country, which is crazy talk. I mean, the fact that it's happening is really outrageous. And so, again, you know, a film like this to be able to be seen all over the country and to be able to have those conversations that, you know, some politicians are trying to ban and not have is really important.
And so, Randy and Sarah, we are going to go to a clip in a moment, but I just want to, before we go to that clip, I do want to acknowledge that the story you both allow to be told in this film is deeply compelling. It is courageous and moving in so many ways. Transformative is probably a better way to describe it. And we definitely want to give our viewers an opportunity to see this clip in The Cost of Inheritance, where we learn how both you, Sarah, and Randy met and how you began to work together to reclaim the 10 acres of land that were actually given to Zeike Quarterman by Samuel Keller. So I'm going to invite the viewers to take a look.
In 2019, I was speaking with my cousin Bill, who lives in the Savannah area. Bill said the Quarterman family still own this plot of 10 acres of land that George Adam Keller gave Zeike Quarterman in the 1800s.
When we found out the land was given to Zeike, he came alive again to us.
Got anything on your heart right now? This is the time, hallelujah.
August 2019. Now I had an email from Sarah acknowledging who her family was and if I was a descendant of Zeike Quarterman, who was enslaved by George Adam Keller. I was just like taken off track a little bit.
I was definitely nervous and scared.
My question was, what are they doing here? What's going on?
I remember thinking, what have I done? What if they yell at me? If they do, they do. They have every right to be angry.
I consulted with Pat Gunn, somebody that was doing this type of work and understanding it.
And so you're standing in a sacred ground. This is a slave holding den, we believe.
She told me, say, hey, you know, your ancestors is on your back. It's a special moment for you. You need to engage.
It's right here. See, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's staggered into a corners, like where a house would be right here. For me and my family, we know this as heirs property.
Land that's passed down through family generations that has no will to say this person owns the land.
It should have been Zeike's house. This probably was the house structure that they lived at.
But the land is not in our possession. In court appointed, a lawyer became the executor of our property.
See, it's like old bricks from back then.
And then Sarah was like, hey, I really want to get you some help to try to clear this title.
I thought, this is so obviously a case of reparations because of America's first attempt at reparations right in that area.
Wow. And that's just the beginning. Sarah, I want to start with you because so much of the conversation and the dialogue around reparations in this country tends to be divisive, hyper-polarized. And there is a lot of fear involved in the work. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you were able to embrace that fear and actually make the first step to reach out to Randy.
Yeah, I'm happy to, and thank you so much for having me and for your kind words. So I consider myself very fortunate that my family told me the truth of our history from the time I was a little girl and would go visit Savannah. And I knew that my ancestors had been enslavers and that it wasn't okay. I wasn't taught, we suffered so much after the Civil War. I was taught this was a horrible system and we were part of it. And so there was never, to start out with, there was not any fear for me about butting up against my family. I'm very, very lucky that I had their support from day one. But of course, it took me, I did a lot of work. I took a course called Holding Whiteness Responsibly by Laura Brewer. I joined Coming to the Table, a group that brings black and white descendants to the table to talk about healing. I thought a lot about how could I approach a descendant of someone my ancestor had enslaved if I were lucky enough to find them. And so I did really prepare myself in terms of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what should I offer, rather than just saying, hey, here's who I am, want to talk, you know. So I did prepare a lot, and still it was scary. I mean, this work is, you know, moving through the shame of our past as a country and as a family is painful, and it's scary to be vulnerable and make connections with people, especially people whose family you're connected to through decades and generations of trauma. But I really reminded myself, like, I might be afraid, but I'm not really in danger in any way, in the same way that black people in America have been in danger for so long. And if I can't kind of figure out a way to work through my fear about just talking to someone, then, oh my gosh, we've got a really big problem. So my choice to move through that problem, because it was a small personal fear, is something that I hope a lot more white people can do. And I will add that it resulted in only incredible relationships. And I think the only way we can heal and have racial repair, in addition to it coming from the top down from the federal government, is to heal on a personal level. And the only way to do that is to create relationships.
Relationships. And so, Randy, the film really does talk about how you initially experienced Sarah's outreach, and at the end of the film, when you and Sarah are in a classroom and you're reflecting on, both of you reflecting on how you feel or what your experience has been. Your story's similar but a little different in terms of how you've experienced this process. You start with fear, and toward the end of the film, you talk about how heavy this has been, how tiring this has been. Can you share a little bit from your perspective about this experience?
Sure. For me, growing up, and of course, a lot of blacks understand in their household, you don't ask certain questions. Certain trauma of history is not spoken of, like how Sarah was having that history lesson going on and on. We don't have that. So the thing was going through Heirs property and understanding that we did have this land, and I did understand that the Keller did own part of our family, but it never was asked of why, what, how did it become in. Those questions was never there. So to understand that we lost an acre of land by eminent domain, and then the system, Georgia Department of Transportation, saying, hey, you know, good luck with getting clear your title. It's in verbatim, good luck. To say that we already lost. So for her to come around, Sarah to come around and open this door for me to actually engage all this, right? But not only by property, by family history. Yeah, I might look at reparations, even for me, like, that'll never happen. That's what I thought as a black man. That ain't gonna never happen. But you never know till you're in that shoe and things are happening with you that you start working towards that and understanding people like Yoruba, Chris Hastings, Mother Moore. You start understanding how in depth this is and what responsibility you have as a black person to go to fight for reparations, which we are owed, right? So in the end, when I'm talking about tiresome, it's more of understanding what Zeike went through. And to say that he was an enslaved man, not a man, an enslaved man that endured being property, to carry that weight is a lot.
What difference would it have made, do you think, if Zeike Quarterman's house had actually become the home for the Quarterman family?
That's a good question, but at the same time, it would have instilled pride in us, but at the same time, knowing that he was enslaved in this country, how can that balance that, right? It's not like he came from Africa and immigrated here and searched for a better world. No, he was basically transported and stolen from his own land to come here to serve another purpose. So that right there, how can we build on that if that's never addressed?
And then the film Yoruba, one of the key themes here is about land and the fight for land. Whether we're talking about the Quartermans family's fight to reclaim land that was owed to them, or we're talking about black farmers. And land that was, in many respects, taken away from black farmers, denied to black farmers. Can you talk a little bit about the power of land in the context of this reparations dialogue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like African Americans, because of the history, the ideas that we're disconnected from land, that we, are only in urban centers, and we know that's not true because so many of us have family that are from the South that own land still even today, as we see with Randy's family. But we don't hear those stories, I guess is what I'm saying. And to understand that we have a history of farming, that there were, as our the black farmer tells us in the film, we had high numbers of farming, and for many reasons, for dispossession, for great migration, of leaving terrorism in the South. We lost that, of not being able to access the loans and land. This is what the promise was, This is what 40 acres and a mule. It was really 40 acres. And that was in the area where Randy's family's from, Sarah's family's from. And that's how I knew. That was the first shoot that we did, the first filming we did with these guys. And learning, I did not even know the full story of Sherman and the black farmers asking for 40, when they said, what do you want? And they said 40 acres, we want land. So that's, that's the make good the promise, that was the promise. So that was, of course, a theme. And I just want to say quickly, this idea too of that we say, oh, that will never happen, and we do that all the time. But I do think, we have to look at things that have happened in this country that we thought would never happen. A black president we thought would never happen. Marriage equality. These are some of the things I thought would never happen, and they've happened in my lifetime. So I think, we thought reparations would never happen, would never go this far. And we see how far it's gone. We have a long way to go, of course, on a federal level, but things happen that we think will never happen. And, I'm hopeful that that will be the case with reparations.
I think truly the film also does explore kind of just how long this movement has been building and how it has evolved over time. And I really appreciate the point of acknowledging what has been accomplished and thinking about the fight that the black farmers have been in and what they've been able to accomplish. And so I wonder in this moment, how you, Sarah, believe this movement can continue to move forward, especially in this political context.
Yeah, I am certainly not. If I could tell you how I think that the federal effort should move forward, I'd be definitely out there in politics. But I think what I've seen happen and how I see it moving forward is, locally, you're seeing lots of different states and cities and towns and universities like Georgetown in the film not wait and go ahead and study reparations, uncover the harm that was done locally, which is the first step, and which is what, as you mentioned, nationally we're trying to do the opposite of that. And that's what's so infuriating. You have, uncover the history, make connections, work toward repair, and then take action. The action, hopefully, with lots of different places, California, New York, the action will eventually, hopefully, happen. But at least these places are uncovering history, making connections, and doing the work toward repair. And that's what we hope we're doing with the Reparations Project on an interpersonal level. And we also see over the past 5 years the white support nationwide for reparations increasing year to year. And we hope we're part of continuing that increase, not just the work that Randy and I do, but a lot of the efforts, like Lottie and Brianna in the film, like lots of different interpersonal efforts that are going on across the country that I know they couldn't fit into 55 minutes. Together, I think we're creating relationships and watching before our eyes. I'm watching white people I know, in hearing these personal stories, change their mind, about whether reparations are a real thing that can happen.
Thank you, and I do want to go to another clip. In this clip from The Cost of Inheritance, we learn about the early beginnings of reparations and Callie House, a leader in the reparations movement. Take a look.
Reparations has been here and have been worked on for generations. From the very beginning, people were knocking on the door saying, we are owed for our labor.
Callie House, she was born a slave. She went out all around in the community telling black people that they ought to ask the government to get some money because they were poor and they were desperate by the 1900s. She had 300,000 dues-paying members. It was the largest organization of black folk that had existed. Pretty soon, her activities came to the attention of the government, and they convicted her of fraud. The federal charge was that at a time when you should have known that the federal government would never give Negroes anything, why were you telling Negroes they should organize to try to get something? They sent her to prison to serve a one-year term. She got out of prison. She went back to Nashville to this shotgun house. She got uterine cancer and she died. You can draw a direct line from Callie House to the reparations movement today.
Randy, so what we know about the reparations movement is that it has, up until this point, really focused on moving the federal government, moving state governments to take action. One of the things that your story really does highlight is the power of personal reparations, and the importance of each individual taking action. Can you share a little bit more about the work, again, that you and Sarah have been doing together through the Reparations Project?
Yeah, sure. When we first talked about the land, I thought of what would we do for the land because of it's nothing there. Nobody's living on our property right now. So we talked about black education was important to us. Land redress was important to us. And then we talked about black art. But as far as black education goes, we end up getting donors from white folks that believed in this work. And we would provide scholarships for students, the black students. So far now we have a little bit over 20. Those students are fighting for social justice. For me, just watching them articulate what they're doing is so inspiring that this work, without
working with Sarah to show that, you know, from white folks' perspective, don't fear it, embrace it. From a black folks' perspective, hey, you know, I'm not coming in this angry like, yeah, you enslaved my family. Let's see how we could work together and build something better so our nation could understand this could be a bigger thing if it works.
Thank you for that. You know, again, the film is deeply compelling and certainly speaks to the work of Chris and his team at World and the power of storytelling Yoruba from your team, but most importantly, the courage that it takes for individuals to be willing to sit together, to work through some tough conversations and some tough history. So thank you. Thank you all. That's the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thank you to all of our guests, and thank you for watching. Now, stay with us as we continue our conversation on our digital platforms, YouTube and Facebook. Okay, I would like to continue this conversation because it is so rich. This documentary really does speak to the power of storytelling to help shift mindset, especially when we're talking about complex issues. And so I'd love, Chris, for you to talk a little bit more about the work of World in tackling some of these complex issues like the issue of reparations.
You know, at World, and I've been at GBH for 21 years, World is different in its focus. The majority of the content that comes on World is produced by independent filmmakers, and that's with intention. Within public media, when you think about the content that you see, a lot of it is produced by stations, but the vast majority of it is produced by independent filmmakers who are actually in their communities telling these stories. This film is a really good example. Aruba is an award-winning filmmaker, but she's an independent producer. And she can get a lot closer to the Randys of the world and the Sarahs of the world, and she can embed in ways that some of our sort of other units might not be able to. But I think that's important to see and do. That's why public media, I think, is a little bit different than the ABCs and the CBSs in the world, and we get to spend a lot more time, you know. I don't know how long you guys worked on. I think it was about 3 years of work. And so there was a lot of embedding and a lot of research and a lot of time to getting to know these stories and understanding these stories and be able to take it back out to audiences in this 54 or 55-minute film. There are so many stories that didn't even make it into here that I hope we're going to be able to bring back. But this idea of independent filmmakers who are at the ground level, working and listening and really taking the time to listen and take it in and turn it into something amazing is important. And when we think about these personal stories, that's what's transformative about what's happening right now. You know, this film and others that we have on World, it's not necessarily captioning what the government can do to make change happening. This film is capturing what individuals are doing. It's really what's going to make, when we think about democracy as a whole, successful, is because it's what everyday people are standing up and saying, no, this ain't right, we're going to make a change. And I think my hope is at World we elevate that over the screaming, the January 6th stuff that's happening sometime in D.C. My hope is what we're doing at World is just sort of centering the good and trying to shut out some of the stuff that don't make sense sometimes.
And also with that, too, it's not only centering, it's also centering the people, right, and not just the experts, right? there's a way you can make this film and just have historians and experts and economists, and that's all very important, and we have those voices in the film, but I knew that the way to reach people was through the personal stories. And how could we tell this through personal stories? Because people don't want to be just lectured to, you know. I teach documentary film. It's one of the first things I tell my students. They'll come in, they want to do, you know, a film about, you know, some idea or issue. Well, who's going to tell that? Because people don't want to, are not watching to be, you know, lectured to. No matter how passionate you feel about this issue, or I feel about this issue. So finding those stories, and we just, you know, there were more, as Chris said, more than we could include in the film, and then we found these great participants who were actively doing it, so we could follow what, you know, in real time, what was happening around, you know, around their work. It was just so, it just came together in such a beautiful way.
How do you and your team build trust within communities to be able to get folks to share some deeply personal stories?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, you know, I don't have a sort of a 1, 2, 3 of this is how you do it, but I think, you know, I make films where I'm genuinely interested, even if it's people that I don't always agree with. I want to know their story. I want to tell their story, help them tell their own story. You know, with Sarah and Randy, me and my team, my producers, reached out to Sarah and Randy, talked to them, and we just knew it was literally one of those things from the first shoot. We were just like, oh my gosh, we have a film here, and these guys are amazing. It was just instinctual. It was just that. That's all I can say. But it's also, you know, throughout the process, and, you know, chime in, and you guys, if it's not, but throughout the process, answering questions that they had. You know, we, when it was ready to show them a cut of the film, to get their feedback and their input, that's really important. You know, the documentary field has come a lot farther around making sure participants in our films are, you know, that there's trust, that they feel comfortable, that they are, you know, willing participants and not being exploited and taken advantage. And certainly for me as a filmmaker, that's extremely important.
And I'll add on to that. When Yoruba and her team came, they let us feel very at home. You know, my children was able to play with the camera. They taught them the camera. But for Yoruba and I to actually have a discussion, you know, just on our own personal level, go through the tour. We went through a special moment in the tour where one of the ladies was reenacting her child being taken by a slave master, being sold, you know, which was an emotional moment. And me and her was standing, and we both was emotional at that moment. But at the same time, Yoruba is so great that she could be directing and be enforcing and be the same friend that you're opened up to say, I'll give you what you need. So this film just generally, like she said, it just took a life of its own.
Very powerful. So in the story, where are we in the story with the land?
Oh, boy.
Oh, wow.
Well, I think I'll let Randy answer most of that, but I think it's really important to note that we're not done yet.
Okay.
And, you know, we've had over 3 years of work on this with a team of very accomplished attorneys in Georgia. And, you know, it's over 3 years. If they were charging us, it would be $1 million bill. And yet, you know, when Georgia Department of Transportation came to Randy's family and said, we're going to take this acre of land, we'll give you fair market value if you can clear title in 12 months. Well, now we really know that's completely impossible. And we have just learned through this process, like, how few families can go through this process to try and clear title on their land.
Yeah, so we would always say it's another 6 months. It's another 6 months, which was it's almost a 3-year, you know, process now. So Heirs property, I could see how black families within the nation lost 90% of their land. because of the same tactics, right? Of one, how can you locate heirs when there was already Reconstruction going on and black families saying, hey, I'm out of here, I'm leaving here. Now there's a family member somewhere else that was part of this land, but he went to up north. He might have died. Family member doesn't know anything about the land, so he's all the way up there. So I could see how heirs' property could diminish our land ownership, right? But at the same time, the ones that's here fighting for it, how can we win when there's already these systems in place to know that our history of Reconstruction and migrating within the country has happened, but then you expecting us to prove every heir. That's an impossible thing. So the laws need to change on that one.
Okay. It feels like the laws were, you know, like so many of the legal system in this country were set up to not have us, you know, reclaim that land. I don't know the history of that, but that's certainly how it feels.
So there's definitely more work that needs to be done from a legal standpoint, as you both mentioned, the public policy aspect of this. You know, that could be. We want to continue to see this story. So, you know, I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I'd love to continue following it. Absolutely.
I'd love to. But again, thank you so very much, all of you, for your deep commitment to storytelling. Storytelling that is truth-seeking, that is authentic, that is transformative, and that is leading to shifts in how people think about complex issues and how people think about the power they have individually, Chris, to make a difference. So thank you all very much for joining us.